It's time for the art auction project. So every year our school has a fundraiser, and part of that fundraiser is to auction off art that each class has made. And a parent from each class kind of takes on the project, and I've taken on my son's 5th grade class. So what I thought we would do is make a community and have the kids make a house, and I would put those houses together into a neighborhood. So last year I did the handprint project with my daughter's 2nd grade class. And I was thinking this year I should have the kids do more of the project as they're older and really should be a part of the making of the project. So we did a test run at home to see how this was going to work. And what we came up with was that it'd be helpful if the kids drew a picture of a house, and it could be their house or it could just be a house that they liked. Then once they had their picture, they could translate that picture into the wood pieces. So I didn't really want them to make a model of a house or a floor plan of a house. What I wanted was sort of the front facade or the view that you see from the street. So they're making a little picture of a house. To get ready for the big day when we were going to go down and have the kids from the class build their houses, I made little 3x4-inch walnut cards, and the kids could use those as their background or their base to start with. And as they'd all be the same, I would have something to work with to make a frame to hold them all together. So once I had those cut out, I sanded all of the edges. Then we went down to the school and we talked to the class, and we basically had them do their drawing of a house in class and explained what we were looking for. I wanted them to do a house, and I wanted them to think of a specific house, but I didn't want them to make the classic kids' drawing of a house with the box and the pitched roof and the chimney on the top and the sun in the corner and the fence in the front yard. I wanted them to really try and make something that they saw in their own mind. And when we were done, I was amazed at how well they did. We had 28 completely different designs for houses. None of them fell into any of the pop culture traps, you know, trying to make something from a video game or trying to make something from a movie. They all felt like they came from the child's own imagination. So once we had all of the houses, it was my job to put them all together into a neighborhood. And one option would be to just make a flat plane out of wood, like a tabletop basically, gluing up a bunch of pieces of wood and making a big surface, and then attaching the houses to that. But that seemed too easy. And it seemed like it was going to be really heavy. So what I thought I would do is make a lattice with lap joints at each of the intersections of the pieces of wood. So I would still end up with a flat piece or a flat frame in the end, but it would have a series of holes in it for each of the houses. So I cut some walnut that I got into strips, and after a bunch of thinking and studying, I came up with 3.5 inches for the width. Once I had the strips cut, I could cut all of them to rough length at the same time on the big radial arm saw. Now, I wanted to make a lattice with half laps at each of the joints. So I needed to come up with a way to hold each one of these wood strips on the CNC machine so I could cut those half laps. And I needed to be able to do this repeatedly. I had 6 strips running horizontal and 7 strips running vertically. Now it's the same cut over and over again. So I came up with a system of holding the strips at each end and in the center with a smaller strip that would just hold the strip down to the table. So the strip is held in place just with friction, but it means that I can hold multiple strips and not wear out the table or the jig. So to make the half lap joints, I ran 2 passes on the CNC machine. one to cut out the center and the bulk of the material. Then a second pass to curve the sides so that I'd get a little bit of a curvy shape to the joint. So you can see it going down and doing the center, and then it goes and does the sides. I found after a while I was getting chip out on the edges of the wood, and it actually worked better to do the side pass first, then do the center pass second. So once I had my joints cut, I could put it together, and it went together. Then I could glue all the joints together. Now when I first started cutting, I was making the joint fairly tight, and they were going together. But then in thinking about it, if I was going to be putting multiple joints together in a big surface, I really didn't want each joint to be so tight. So I ended up making everything a little looser. So everything is 9/1000ths of an inch bigger than 0. And that actually worked really well because I was able to get everything together, and it was still fairly tight getting it together, and the joints still look tight. But if you pick up just 2 pieces and put one joint together, it would seem loose. Now once I had it together, there were a couple of spots where I had knots in the wood. And at first I was just going to cut circles out and inlay a circle. And my wife suggested I do cars because they're supposed to be streets, and that would make it a little more fun. So I did a car and a truck. And then I could cut out the positive for those shapes. I found when doing this, when cutting out the positive or the plug, I mirror that in the computer. So I cut out the mirror image so that I can flip the piece over and put it in from the top down. And what that means is my bridges and whatever bit doesn't get cut at the bottom ends up at the top. So I'm not trying to push that ragged edge into the hole. So once all the joints were put together and the plugs were put in, I could then flatten the surface. And I just did one big pass to flatten the whole thing. And you can see it going over the truck and then over the car. And it just makes everything flush. And I made a lot of sawdust. Now I wanted to make a little pocket or a little lip for each of the houses to go over each of the holes in the lattice. So this will fit the little piece of walnut that I made in the beginning. And I had to do a carefully measured drawing so that all of my pockets would fall over the holes in the lattice. And in doing this, I found that the lattice was racked about 1/8 of an inch. So it's not quite a rectangle, it's more of a rhombus, just a tiny bit. Now, I wanted to make this a neighborhood, and I wanted to put our school into the mix of houses. And it worked out to where we have 28 houses, and I was doing a grid of 5 by 6. So that left me with 2 extra spaces. So what I came up with is that I could make a big walnut back, sort of a double piece, and that would be the school. And the way that the grid works out, that school can sit exactly in the center. So I made a double-sized back and tried to put some pieces together. And I have way too much architecture training. My thing, I thought, just looked stupid. It looked way too much like I was trying to make something that looked like something. So I got the kids out to the shop and I had them help. There's something about a young mind that doesn't have all the baggage that lets it be so much freer in the way that the art or the design comes out. And it looks fairly similar to what I had, but there's a little bit of detail that just wouldn't have been there, and a little bit more fun than what I was doing. So once I had something, I could glue it together. So I carefully moved it onto another board and photographed it, then glued it together onto the piece of walnut. So I could see how those lay out on the lattice and sort of put the 2 projects together. I had kind of known all along that I probably wasn't just going to want to leave the surface of the lattice flat, that I might want to carve roads or paths or something into that wood to make it feel more like a map or a model of a neighborhood and to tie the houses together. So I made a test piece with 2 houses on a scrap piece of walnut. So I jointed that and planed it and cut it to size and cut some roads and driveways and paths into the surface of that piece of wood. And that really did seem to help. It kind of makes it feel like there's a scale to all of this and that it is actually something. It's not just a bunch of bits of wood glued to other bits of wood. And doing that really seemed to tie the houses together. Is this thing where I wanted space between the houses so that they would be separate, but they really needed to be tied together like a neighborhood or like a community. So I mapped out and actually made specific driveways and paths for each house and cut that into my lattice. Then I could sand the tops of the lattice at this point, and I left the roads a little bit rough, so they'll be a little bit different from the frames that surround the houses. Now I wanted to cut this down to size, and one thought was to pull it off and cut it on the table saw. But what I thought I could do is cut it off the table of the CNC, and that would give me a perfect rectangle. But in doing that, I had it attached with screws out at the ends of the tabs. And if I was going to cut it, I was going to end up cutting without any support on the piece. So I put 4 blocks in the center, sort of friction blocks, that'll hold the piece in place once the final screw on the perimeter has been cut free. And then once it's cut, I can just pull it out. And the school can go in, and then the houses can go in. Now I can glue the houses into place. And there's a little reveal around the edge of the house, so I didn't want to get glue on the entire bottom of the little cutout, because you'd see it in that reveal. So I just put little dabs of glue at the corners. And the school was a little bigger, but basically the same idea. Then I could continue doing the rest of the houses. And the school needed a little weight on it. It was popping up on the corner. Then for finish, I ended up putting a coat of polyurethane on the back, as I didn't want the finish on the front to start to bend the whole piece so that it would be balanced on the front and the back. And then on the front, I did spray lacquer, which is a first for me. I didn't know that I could get into all of the little nooks and crannies of the houses with a brush or a cloth very easily. So I figured spraying it was probably the best option. And that's how it turned out. It turned out really nice. I thought the kids did an amazing job. It was amazing seeing minds that aren't so cluttered with life come up with things. You can see the design process, and the art is so much freer and so much more able to just be what it wants to be. Thanks for watching.